Who teaches you fight like that?
Who teaches you to fight like that? The coach asked black girl Bella. The words came softly through the thunder of the crowd. The match was over, the final bell long gone, but the arena still pulsed with life. The lights poured down in gold, bouncing off the ropes, catching the shimmer of sweat and triumph. In the center of the ring stood Bella, 18 years old, chest heaving, her red gloves trembling with exhaustion and glory. Her white vest clung to her shoulders, her blue shorts darkened by effort, and her eyes, fierce, wet, unblinking, stared straight ahead. Beside her, Coach David, dressed in his black suit, reached out and lifted her arm high. His weathered hand, strong and sure, gripped hers with the kind of pride that words could never hold. Cameras flashed, the crowd erupted, and in that blinding storm of sound and light, the world seemed to pause. Bella didn't smile. She just breathed, deep, slow, almost disbelieving. Her arm, raised by David's, felt heavy with more than victory. It carried the weight of everything that brought her here. The long nights, the quiet hunger, the memories that never left. Her gloves trembled in the air, not from weakness, but from release. All around her, people shouted her name, a name that moments ago was unknown to most of them. They called it now like it was legend. "Bella! Bella!" Over and over again until the sound became something larger than celebration. It became recognition. Coach David stood close beside her, his eyes locked on her face. In that moment, he wasn't just a coach. He was witness to something sacred, a girl's fight not for fame, but for freedom. Bella looked up, not at the crowd, but at the ceiling lights that seemed to stretch forever upward. Her breath steadied, her lips parted slightly, and in that quiet second between the noise and the silence, she thought of one name, her mother's. The noise faded in her mind. She could still hear it, that faint voice from her past, whispering between memories. "When the world hits you, baby, don't you ever stay down." Coach David's question echoed again in her memory. "Who teaches you to fight like that?" But Bella didn't answer with words. She simply closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then lifted her free glove higher toward the lights above. The cameras caught it, that gesture, that silent devotion. To the world, it looked like a champion thanking the heavens. But to Bella, it was a conversation, a message carried through the roar. Her mother had fought her own battles, not in rings, but in life. Against bills, hunger, heartbreak, and loss. Every struggle, every scar had taught Bella what no gym ever could. She had learned how to swing before she learned how to speak. The ring, now drenched in sweat and spotlight, became something else, a place of memory, a symbol of everything she and her mother had survived. Coach David lowered her arm gently, his hand still on her shoulder. He looked at her, truly looked. And for the first time in his long career, he didn't see a student. He saw a legacy being born. The crowd's chant softened into a rhythmic applause. The photographers moved closer, shouting her name. Reporters leaned over the ropes. But Bella stayed in her moment, unmoved, unshaken. Her breathing slowed. Her heart calmed. The air thick with history. She knelt down in the corner of the ring, the same corner where her gloves first touched the mat hours earlier, and rested her forehead against the ropes. The sound of the crowd blurred into a hum, like waves breaking on a distant shore. For the first time that night, she smiled. It wasn't wide or loud, just a quiet, knowing curve of the lips. The kind that said, "Mama, we did it." Coach David watched in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The story was written all over her, in bruises, in breath, in the calm strength of her stance. When Bella finally stood again, the lights caught her face just right, half shadow, half glow, like the world was still deciding if she belonged to pain or to victory. Maybe she belonged to both, and as the noise of the arena rose again, Bella turned her head slightly, looking once more at the man beside her, the coach who had believed in her when no one else did. The crowd chanted louder. The cameras flashed faster. But above it all, the young black girl in red gloves, white vest, and blue shorts raised her fist one last time, not for the gold, not for the glory, but for the woman who had taught her to fight before she ever stepped inside a ring. The arena lights dimmed. The roar faded. The story of Bella, the girl who turned pain into prayer and punches into poetry, had only begun. The roar of the crowd still lived in the walls long after the lights dimmed. Even as the arena emptied, the sound of victory clung to the air like smoke after a storm. The ring crews moved quietly now, wiping the ropes, collecting towels, sweeping away the glitter that had fallen like rain. But in the middle of it all, Bella's presence lingered, strong and steady, as if her spirit refused to leave the mat. Her red gloves hung loose from her wrists. Her body ached, her arms trembled, but her heart felt weightless. For the first time in years, the noise around her wasn't the sound of struggle. It was celebration. She had won. Not just a match, not just a medal, but a piece of her mother's unfinished dream. Coach. David followed her down the narrow tunnel that led from the ring to the locker rooms. The noise faded with every step, replaced by the distant hum of vending machines and the echo of their own footsteps on concrete. His black suit was damp with sweat and streaked with chalk dust from the ropes. Yet he walked with the quiet dignity of a man who had just seen history happen. Bella moved ahead of him, shoulders squared, head high. The gold medal bounced softly against her chest with each step, catching the last flickers of arena light. Around her, the air still buzzed with the energy of the fight. But she felt strangely calm, like a storm that had finally spent its rage. The locker room was half-lit and silent. Rows of metal benches, dented lockers, and peeling paint told stories of 1,000 other fighters who had stood here before. A cracked mirror leaned against the far wall, reflecting fragments of light and shadow. Bella stopped before it. Her reflection looked older than 18. Sweat streaked her face, her braids clung to her neck, and her eyes, deep, dark, burning, looked like they had seen too much for one lifetime. She lifted her glove slowly, tracing the reflection of her mother's locket beneath the vest. For a moment, she imagined that her mother's face might appear beside hers in that mirror, smiling the way she used to after long shifts. Coach David set her bag on the bench but said nothing. He had learned that silence was the only language strong enough for moments like this. He watched her unlace the gloves, fingers stiff and red. The sound of the Velcro peeling away was sharp, final, like the closing of a chapter. When the gloves dropped onto the bench, her hands looked smaller, young again, but marked by bruises that told their own story. Those hands had carried groceries, cleaned kitchens, and buried dreams before they ever touched a boxing glove. They weren't made for luxury. They were made for endurance. She flexed her fingers, staring at the swollen knuckles, and the room seemed to dissolve around her. The dripping pipe above became rain hitting a tin roof. The hum of the fluorescent light became her mother's humming voice, and the locker's metal clang became the distant sound of pots in their old apartment kitchen. Bella was 12 again. The electricity had been cut off for the 3rd time that year. Her mother stood near the window, washing dishes in cold water by candlelight. Her hands were rough and red from soap, her face tired but kind. Bella remembered sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, angry at the darkness, angry at the world that seemed to forget them. That night, her mother had told her something that never left her. The world might hit you, but you don't have to stay down. Then she had lifted her small daughter's fists, showing her how to tighten them, how to stand, how to breathe. It wasn't a lesson in violence, it was a lesson in survival. From that moment on, Bella fought everything that tried to silence her. Poverty, doubt, fear. She fought for every woman who came before her and every little girl who would come after. Back in the locker room, the memory faded, but the fire it left behind still burned. Bella tied her mother's locket tighter around her neck and sat down. The metal gleamed beside it, 2 symbols of 2 different worlds, bound together on the same chain. Coach David leaned against the wall, watching quietly. He had trained champions who fought for fame, men who fought for ego, but Bella was different. She fought like every punch was a story, every round a chapter, every victory a memorial. He didn't understand all of it, but he respected it more than anything he'd ever seen. She stood again and opened her locker. Inside, a folded photograph was taped to the door, her and her mother, outside the old apartment building, both smiling through struggle. Bella reached up and touched the picture, her thumb tracing the edges until her eyes blurred. Outside, thunder rolled faintly. Rain began to tap the roof, soft and steady, like an applause only she could hear. She took a deep breath, gathered her things, and turned toward the door. But she didn't leave yet. Instead, she looked back at the mirror once more. Her reflection stared back at her, not as a champion now, but as a continuation of something sacred. She realized that her mother had never truly left her. She had just passed the gloves forward. Bella smiled faintly, that same small, quiet smile she wore in the ring. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude. The door creaked as Coach David opened it, letting in the hallway's dim yellow light. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable but full of quiet respect. Then he stepped aside, letting her walk through first. As Bella stepped out into the hallway, the faint scent of rain and concrete filled her lungs. The sound of her footsteps echoed like a heartbeat down the long corridor. She could feel every bruise, every ache, every breath of the fight still clinging to her. Yet somehow it didn't weigh her down. It lifted her. Each step forward felt like walking, away from the girl, who used to wonder if she'd ever be seen, and toward the woman who now carried her, mother's strength in every bone. The exit door was heavy. When she pushed it open, the cool night air hit her face, washing away the heat of the arena. Rain fell steady now, soaking her hair, her vest, the metal that gleamed like liquid fire in the dim streetlight. The city stretched before her, dark buildings, flashing signs, distant sirens. It looked both endless and alive. She tilted her head back, letting the rain fall on her face. The drops felt like baptism, like release, like something inside her was being renewed. Behind her, Coach David stood under the awning, hands in his pockets, watching his fighter walk into the rain without hesitation. He had seen many champions in his years, but none carried themselves like her. Bella didn't need an audience anymore. The world had already heard her story, whether it understood it or not. As she walked into the night, her reflection shimmered, faintly in the puddles on the pavement, red gloves at her side, gold medal on her chest, the stormlight reflecting off her skin. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was walking with it. Every bruise, every scar, every lesson from her mother was alive inside her, burning like a torch passed down from one generation to the next. The city lights blurred in the rain. The world stretched ahead like an open road. And as she disappeared into the darkness, one truth followed her, quiet, powerful, eternal. The fire that her mother started in a dim apartment kitchen still burned, steady and bright, inside the heart of the girl who refused to fall. Fame didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, first as a whisper, then as a wave. Within days of her victory, Bella's name was everywhere. News clips showed the moment her hand rose in triumph, the camera catching the tears she tried to hide. The internet called her the girl who fought life and won. Interviews replayed her every move, her every breath, her every glance upward toward the heavens. But while the world celebrated the legend, Bella still woke up in the same small apartment. The medal hung from a nail above her bed, catching the sunlight each morning. But her room was still half empty, simple, quiet, almost sacred. The walls carried pictures of her mother, faded and curled at the edges, and the scent of old boxing tape mixed with the faint sweetness of coconut oil she used to braid her hair. Each dawn, she laced her gloves again. The world saw a champion. Bella saw a student still learning how to carry her crown. The gym was busier now. Reporters came to take photos. Children watched through the glass, imitating her stance, their laughter echoing like hope. But the noise, the lights, the cameras, it all felt heavier than any opponent she had faced. Coach David tried to shield her from it, but fame doesn't knock. It enters without permission. She trained longer hours, sharper rounds, her punches cutting the air like lightning. Yet behind every jab, every hook, there was something new. Pressure. The pressure to be perfect, to never fall, to stay golden even when her body begged for rest. The whispers started soon after. Commentators questioned if her first victory had been luck. Critics said she was too young, too emotional, too different. Some headlines praised her as a miracle. Others tried to pull her back to the ground she had fought so hard to rise from. Coach David noticed the change. Bella wasn't just fighting in the ring anymore. She was fighting the world's expectations. And in that unseen war, exhaustion crept in quietly, like fog before dawn. Weeks turned to months. Invitations flooded in, Tournaments, sponsorships, press tours. Bella smiled for cameras but felt the distance growing between who she was and who the world wanted her to be. The girl who fought for survival was now a symbol of success. But symbols don't bleed. Symbols don't cry. Late at night, when the city was asleep, Bella would stand by her window and look at the skyline. The metal gleamed beside her, the weight of it pressing softly against her chest. Sometimes she'd whisper her mother's name into the dark. Not to call her back, but to remind herself she wasn't alone. Then came the announcement that changed everything. A championship match. The biggest of her career. The opponent, a woman named Cassandra the Titan Wells. Older, taller, unbeaten. Known for her brutal power and cold precision. The world framed it as a clash of generations. Experience versus fire. Tradition versus change. But for Bella, it was something deeper. Cassandra wasn't just another fighter. She represented every voice that had ever told Bella she wasn't enough. The training for the match was grueling. Days melted into nights. Sweat mixed with rain. Every punch she threw was met with the echo of her mother's words. Don't stay down. But even strength has limits. There were moments when her hands trembled from overuse, when her reflection in the mirror looked almost unfamiliar. She'd press her palm against the cold glass, staring at the faint scars on her knuckles, wondering how much of herself she could give before there was nothing left. Coach David stayed by her side through it all. He pushed her hard, but never beyond reason. He saw the storm inside her, the fear of losing. Not the match, but the meaning behind her victories. He reminded her that the fight wasn't just about who hit harder. It was about who stood taller when the world tried to shrink them. The weeks passed quickly. The night of the championship arrived like a heartbeat, loud, fast, impossible to ignore. The arena was massive, glowing with neon lights and thunderous music. Thousands filled the stands, chanting her name, waving signs, wearing shirts printed with her face. But in the center of all that noise, Bella stood silent. Her red gloves gleamed under the spotlights. Her white vest clung to her shoulders, soaked already with the warmth of the crowd's energy. Her blue shorts bore the small stitched initials MB for her mother, Myra Brooks. Cassandra stood across the ring, calm and composed. Her stare was cold as steel. Years of experience had taught her to show no weakness, but Bella didn't look for weakness. She looked for truth. And in Cassandra's eyes, she saw it, the same hunger, the same fire, the same need to prove something the world had doubted. The bell rang. The first round was chaos and rhythm all at once. Gloves collided like thunderclaps. Every hit shook the air. Cassandra's jabs were heavy, deliberate. Bella's counters were sharp, quick, almost graceful. The crowd erupted with every exchange, the noise swelling and breaking like waves against the shore. But Cassandra's experience showed. Her movements were measured, her defense unbreakable. She landed a few brutal shots to Bella's ribs, and pain shot through Bella's body like lightning. For the first time, Bella felt the edge of fear. Cold, creeping, real. She stumbled back, gasping, the world spinning around her. The lights blurred, the sound faded. Somewhere in that haze, she remembered her mother's hands guiding her stance, teaching her to breathe through the pain. She steadied herself. Round after round, she found her rhythm again, not just with her fists, but with her heart. Every punch she threw wasn't for the crowd or the cameras. It was for the little girl who once fought shadows in a candle-lit apartment. It was for her mother who never got to see this moment. By the final round, both women were exhausted, bodies bruised, spirits tested. The ring felt smaller now, like the whole world had narrowed to the space between them. Sweat dripped onto the mat, mixing with the marks of every fight fought before them. And then it happened. A perfect cross. A punch that carried not anger but clarity. It struck clean, powerful, and final. Cassandra stumbled. The crowd gasped. When the bell rang, the air froze. Both fighters stood still, breathing like engines. Then the referee lifted Bella's arm high. The arena exploded. But this time Bella didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just closed her eyes and felt the weight of everything. The cheers, the bruises, the memory of her mother's voice in the rain. Her body trembled not from pain, but from something deeper, a realization. Winning didn't heal everything. It didn't erase loss. It didn't stop the ache that still lived quietly inside her chest. But it did something else. It gave that ache meaning. As the crowd chanted her name, she looked up, eyes glistening beneath the bright lights. Somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the cameras, beyond the glory, she felt her mother's presence again. Soft, proud, eternal. And in that sacred silence, that lives only in the hearts of those who've overcome the impossible, Bella smiled, not as a champion, but as a daughter who finally understood that some fights never end. They just evolve. The cheers faded long before the meaning of them did. When the stadium lights went out that night, the echoes of Bella's name lingered like ghosts in the rafters. The crowd had gone home, the reporters packed up their cameras, and the ring stood empty, sweat still glistening. On the ropes like dew in the morning light, Bella sat on the edge of the ring, gloves resting beside her, head bowed. Her body was covered in bruises that felt like stories carved into her skin, reminders of what it took to stand. Where she stood, she should have felt invincible. But what she felt instead was a strange, tender quiet, the kind that comes only after a storm has given all it has. Coach David stood a few feet away, leaning against the corner post. His black suit rumpled, his eyes soft. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. The kind of silence that only exists between teacher and student, between father figure and daughter of destiny. The medal still hung around her neck, heavy, gleaming under the dim lights. She traced her thumb over the engraved letters, feeling their coldness against her warm skin. That night she walked home in the rain again. The same rain that had fallen after her first victory. The same rhythm tapping against the pavement like the heartbeat of the city itself. But this time the rain didn't feel like cleansing, it felt like memory. Like her mother was walking beside her, whispering through the drops. In the weeks that followed, the world couldn't get enough of Bella Brooks. Her face-filled magazine covers. Sports networks replayed her victory from every angle, and interviews called her the new face of power. But inside, Bella felt a different kind of pull. The lights no longer felt like home. The roar of the crowd no longer filled the quiet inside her chest. She began visiting her old neighborhood again. The cracked sidewalks, the faded murals, the corner store where she and her mother once shared cheap ice cream on hot days. The same streets that had once seemed too small for her dreams now felt sacred, like pages of a book she had finally learned to read. Children ran up to her when she appeared, some barefoot, some with gloves too big for their hands. They called her Miss Bella, their voices full of wonder. They didn't care about titles or belts. They cared about what she represented, the proof that someone from their world could touch the stars and still come back home. So Bella started showing up at the old gym again, the one with flickering lights, cracked floors, and heavy bags patched with duct tape. It was where her mother had once trained in secret after long work shifts, dreaming of a future she never got to see. Bella walked in quietly one afternoon carrying a box. Inside were her first pair of gloves, faded red, torn at the seams, still carrying the scent of salt and struggle. She hung them on the wall beneath a new sign she had made herself. The sign read, "The Myra Brooks Foundation, Fighting for Tomorrow." That gym became something new, not just a place for punches, but a sanctuary, a home for every child who carried anger they didn't understand, every girl who was told she wasn't strong enough, every boy who thought his story ended before it began. Bella trained them the way her mother once trained her, with discipline, compassion, and a belief that fighting wasn't about hurting others, but about healing yourself. Word spread quickly. Cameras came again, but this time Bella didn't mind. She stood in front of the gym's cracked door and told the reporters that her mother's hands had built everything they saw. The gloves, the gym, the strength, it all began with her. At night, when the students had gone and the city lights flickered through the high windows, Bella would sit alone in the ring, the sound of jump ropes and laughter still echoing faintly. She'd close her eyes and remember that candlelit kitchen, her mother's tired smile, the soft hum of a lullaby that had once filled the silence of hunger. Sometimes she'd lift her hands and stare at them, those same hands that had thrown punches, powerful enough to shake arenas, were now used to tie children's gloves, wipe away their tears, and lift them back to their feet. That was when she realized something her victories had never taught her. True strength wasn't measured by how many fights you won, but by how many lives you helped stand again. Years passed, and Bella's legend grew, not just as a fighter, but as a force of change. The foundation expanded across cities, giving scholarships, building gyms, saving dreams. Her story was studied in schools, her image painted on murals, her mother's name spoken with reverence. But Bella herself remained grounded. She still braided her hair the same way, still wore the same chain with the locket, still trained before sunrise, her breath steady, her heart unshaken. On the anniversary of her mother's passing, she returned to the small cemetery on the edge of town. The grass was damp, the wind gentle. She brought with her two things, the medal and a single red glove. She placed them carefully at the base of the headstone, the same one she used to visit as a scared teenager searching for answers. For a long time, she just stood there, eyes closed, listening to the wind move through the trees. She didn't need to speak. The silence between her and her mother had always said enough. As the sun began to set, the light caught the gold of the medal and the soft leather of the glove. They glowed together like two souls reunited. Bella turned to leave, her footsteps soft on the wet ground. Behind her, the faint sound of children laughing drifted from the direction of the city. The next generation was already training, already learning, already believing, and in that moment, she understood the full circle of it all. Her mother had once taught her how to stand. Bella had learned how to fight. And now she was teaching others how to rise. That was the true victory. Not the belt, not the fame, not the applause. It was legacy, the kind that lives quietly in others, long after the lights fade. That night, back in her apartment, she stood before her mirror again. The same cracked mirror that had reflected her pain, her doubt, her growth. She looked at her reflection, older now, wiser, peaceful. Her hands bore faint scars. Her shoulders carried stories. But her eyes still burned with that same unshakable fire. She lifted her right hand slowly, palm open, fingers trembling slightly. And for just a heartbeat in the shimmer of the glass, another hand appeared beside hers, familiar, gentle, strong. Her mother's. Bella smiled softly. The reflection faded, but the feeling didn't. It stayed, deep in her chest, steady as her breath. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, followed by rain. Always rain. And in that endless rhythm of drops against the window, Bella Brooks, once a girl fighting shadows, now a woman shaping futures, closed her eyes, bowed her head, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Her fight was never about victory. It was about becoming the reason someone else would never give up. The storm outside grew louder, but inside, all was calm. Because somewhere between the ring and the rain, between a mother's dream and a daughter's hands, Bella had found what she was truly fighting for all along. A legacy that could never be knocked down.